Introduced by Hillsborough campaigner Margaret Aspinall as a Prime Minister who kept his word. But he's also a Prime Minister tanking in the polls who needed to find new words to convince people he has a vision.
It's an urgent task. We can all see that the country faces a choice, a defining choice. Britain stands at a fork in the road. We can choose decency or we can choose division.
Surrounded by a sea of flags, this was a speech that tried to snatch back patriotism.
There are flags. They belong to all of us, and we will never surrender them.
The spectre of Nigel Farage galvanising the speech and the hall.
When was the last time that you heard Nigel Farage say anything positive about Britain's future? He can't. He doesn't like Britain, doesn't believe in Britain, wants you to doubt it just as much as he does.
Building to a passionate attack on Reform's immigration plans.
The people who've lived here for generations, raised their children here, built their lives here. If you say they should now be deported, then mark my words, we will fight you with everything we have, because you are the enemy of national renewal.
There were only a few policies backing for the Gaza peace plan, including apprenticeships and the targets for further education, and a big hint he will lift the two-child benefit cap in the budget.
100,000 children lifted out of poverty. The first step on our journey to end child poverty.
There was an acknowledgement of tough choices to come.
It doesn't get easier from here. And the tough decisions, they will keep on coming.
The Chancellor looked as though they were weighing heavily. On stage, Keir Starmer seemed to be relishing his new direction, finding his vision in opposition to reform.
With resolve, with respect, with the flag in our hands, we will renew this country until we can say with total conviction that Britain is built for all.
The Prime Minister's found a stronger voice here, some fire in his belly, a reclaiming of patriotism with more flags than a reform conference. But is it anywhere near enough to convince voters not feeling the wealth in their community that this speech promised? What about all those voters who are saying, when am I going to feel a difference?
Done a lot of good so far. We know there's so much more to do. The challenges are enormous, but as you've seen from the Prime Minister, he's up for the fight and so are we.
Now, you're a good friend of Andy Burnham. Do you think that speech did enough to put to bed any leadership ambitions?
I don't think there were any in regard to that. I just think that we need all to settle down, and we will do.
That challenge seen off and congratulated by his wife on what was one of the best speeches he's delivered, but no guarantee it will be enough.
Romilly, this is a clear change of strategy for Labour, isn't it, who are now fully focused on fighting reform. What has Nigel Farage had to say?
Well, initially Reform claimed they were loving the attention, but tonight Nigel Farage seems to have had a big change of heart, releasing a video recorded by his party and dubbed by them an address to the nation. He claims that the Prime Minister has descended into the gutter, saying this.
This is a desperate last throw of the dice from a Prime Minister who's in deep trouble, a Prime Minister who can't even command the support of half of his own party. But I'm sorry to say, I now believe that he is unfit to be the Prime Minister of our country.
He had a lot more to say too, including that it would encourage attacks by what he called the radical left, echoing language used by President Trump, and that would endanger Reform MPs and campaigners. But the Cabinet tonight is not shying away from this fight. The Home Secretary telling us tonight that Nigel Farage is almost worse, in her words, than racist.
Romilly, thank you. Our political editor, Robert Peston, also joins us from Liverpool. Robert, has the Prime Minister shored up his position?
Well, there are two distinct ways of looking at this. Certainly, if you look around me at this conference, most people here feel much more optimistic after that speech. They like what they heard, and running up to it, they'd been feeling very anxious. And the reason for that is because, actually, as Romilly said, this was one of his better speeches. It was filled with passion, it felt authentic, and most people here absolutely identify with his attacks on the Reform Party. I mean, this is Labour. They don't share the same values as Nigel Farage and Reform. But there is a big risk, actually, in terms of what the Prime Minister is doing. Romilly also mentioned that Reform normally likes lots of attention, and she claimed that Nigel Farage wasn't sending out that message tonight. Not so sure about that. This has given him an opportunity to basically speak to the very large numbers of people who support reform, that the Prime Minister is denigrating them. The Prime Minister says that when he calls their migration policy racist, he is not calling reform's supporters racist. But, many people just don't understand the distinction. If they're supporting a policy that the Prime Minister is saying is racist, he must be denigrating them too. And that is very, very high risk for the Prime Minister.
And Robert, ITV's been reporting on how the budget is likely to see the abolition of the two-child benefit cap. What have you learnt about that?
So, as we have repeatedly said, we think it will be scrapped in the budget, but there is a commission that has been reviewing different ways of reducing child poverty, and what it's come up with, hasn't yet adjudicated on what it thinks is the best route, is a series of different ways of making the two-child benefit cap less severe. So one of the ideas they've been looking at is to introduce a taper. So you would get a certain amount for the first child, maybe a bit less for the second, a bit less from the third and the fourth, and so on. They might even introduce a limit. So maybe it would be at 4 children you wouldn't get any extra benefit. The other thing they're looking at, which is actually a Farage policy, so it's quite striking to me that you've got a Prime Minister attacking reform, but actually one of the ideas they're looking at is to make the abolition of the two-child limit, that it would only apply to people who have got jobs, which, as I say, is very much a reform position. Now, I think we should be clear that none of this can be done until the budget because it requires money. As our colleague Joel has been saying, it's almost certainly going to be partly funded by an increased tax on gambling, but it doesn't raise the full, well, if they were to scrap it all together, that's going to cost £3.5 billion, and the gambling tax won't raise that. So between now and the budget, there is certainly quite a lot of detail to work out, although the principle that in some shape or form it's going to be softened or even abolished altogether, the two-child limit, that's definitely going to happen.
OK, Robert, thanks very much. The Prime Minister's speech was light on policy, but he did announce NHS Online, a new app which he said would offer patients millions of appointments with GPs and specialists. Our political reporter Jasmine Cameron-Chileshi is at the conference. And Jasmine, how will this work then, and how soon will it come into force?
So this is all part of the government's plan to modernise the NHS and move the health service from analogue to digital. So patients will be able to access this online hospital using the NHS app. There they'll be able to obtain services, for example, getting clinical advice. Now, the government wants to roll this out from 2027, with the initial focus being on some of those high priority treatments. Now, announcing the policy in the hall, the Prime Minister said that this could deliver up to 8.5 million appointments in the first 3 years.
Today I can announce a completely digital NHS Trust, NHS Online, that will offer millions of appointments, convenient appointments, appointments you choose, a new chapter in the story of our NHS, harnessing the future, patients in control, waiting times cut for every single person in the country. That's national renewal, that's a Britain built for all.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer and his team argue that this will improve patient care, but some health groups have questioned what the government's going to do to make sure people don't get left behind.
Measures like this to open up, to find different routes to access are important, but it has to be done carefully. So we do need to think about the digitally excluded, and it's got to be right. So if you're living with, for example, a long-term condition, continuity of care is really important to you.
Now, politically, officials close to the PM hope that this will help them reach their target of reducing NHS wait times, and they hope it will draw another dividing line between themselves and Reform UK. And certainly, as we heard, this has been the theme of this conference. Earlier today, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting argued that Nigel Farage was threatening the future of the NHS. But there are still lots of unanswered questions about all of this, and certainly NHS trusts, doctors and nurses, they're going to be looking to the government for clarity over the next few months to get a sense of how this is going to work in practice.